Okay, it looks like it's set up.
Yeah, I'd say that's live on Facebook.
You can see it
Yes,
live?
it says live. Yes, live.
All right. Okay. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. My name is Samar Hassan, and I'm the founder of Epiphany, which you guys know is a social enterprise. Executive Baithak is one of the initiatives that we do. आपको पता है कि हमने काफ़ी सारे executive Baithaks पहले भी किए हैं कराची में जब हम face to face कर सकते थे तब हम face to face करते थे और multiple topics के ऊपर हमने host किए हैं branding से लेके किस तरह digital transformation, digital technology की वजह से marketing is changing and so on and so forth. Obviously जब से कोविड स्टार्ट हुआ है तब हमने अपने सारे तमाम जो कम्युनिटी बिल्डिंग वर्क है वो ऑनलाइन ले गए थे हम and this is probably I think maybe our 52nd or 53rd webinar under whether it's under executive Baithak या impacting lives जो भी हो. So आज का जो टॉपिक है it's very very interesting, very important. आप लोगों को याद होगा कि right at the beginning जब कोविड शुरू हुआ था पाकिस्तान में तो हमने अप्रैल में एक सेशन ऑलरेडी इसके ऊपर किया था. उस टाइम पे बहुत सारे कंसर्न्स थे कि क्या होगा, राइट? कोविड के बाद पाकिस्तान के ऊपर क्या इम्पैक्ट आएगा, हाउ विल पाकिस्तान बी एबल टू रिस्पॉन्ड, जो तमाम इनफॉर्मल इकोनॉमी है वो कैसे कंटिन्यू करेगी, एंड यू नो व्हाट डज द फ्यूचर होल्ड उस टाइम पे फॉर पाकिस्तान. ऑब्वियसली नाउ वी सॉ यू नो ओवरऑल जब हम वर्ल्ड से कंपेयर करते हैं तो वी सॉ कि पाकिस्तान डिड मच बेटर. उस तरह का इम्पैक्ट इन टर्म्स ऑफ लॉसेज ऑफ ह्यूमन लाइव्स इतना मैसिव नहीं हुआ, which was really positive. I mean, of course, बहुत सारे support government ने करने की कोशिश की. Different जो आपके underprivileged या marginalized backgrounds के लोग थे उन तक you know direct funds transfer हुए etc. Plus we saw कि पाकिस्तानी diaspora ने बहुत ज़्यादा they you know paid it forward. We received a lot of remittances. So a lot of you know things came together. People supported one another. There were enormous amounts of philanthropic drives that took place. But अगर हम थोड़ी सी नज़र डालें इंटरनेशनल पर्सपेक्टिव पे तो बहुत सारी जो जियोपॉलिटिकल डेवलपमेंट्स या जो आपके जो ट्रेंड्स थे they got solidified, right? And it came to be okay, every nation for themselves, you know, everybody is looking out for themselves, and because of that there have been of course repercussions for Pakistan. तो आज का जो हमारा सेशन है उसमें I am delighted because I have three very very eminent personalities with me who obviously know a lot more about investment, about geopolitical situation, about diplomacy than I do, which is why I'm extremely happy that all three of them agreed to be part of our session today. And thank you to all the attendees. I see that they're slowly and gradually piling in. I understand it's a Saturday afternoon, but thank you for joining us. And we hope that you will contribute as well in terms of asking questions. अगर कोई भी आप लोगों के सवालात हों तो आप यहाँ पे Q&A का आप लोगों को सेक्शन नजर आ रहा होगा. Please feel free to type in your questions, and once the three speakers जब वो अपनी बातें कुछ मुकम्मल कर चुके होंगे तो फिर we will go towards your questions. All right, so let me quickly, very briefly, सबका तारुफ मैं करा देती हूँ. I'm sure you guys are familiar with them already. So with me, our keynote speaker today is Mr. Haroon Sharif. Haroon Sharif, former Minister of State हैं. Board of Investments. He used to be the chairman of Pakistan's Board of Investments. Economic diplomacy is his area of expertise, and of course, he's a thought leader. काफी सारे लोग इनको already जानते होंगे. So thank you very much, sir, for joining us. Would you like to tell the audience a little bit more about yourself?
Well, thank you for having me over and reaching me out. It's good to speak to a group of young professionals. My background is all three sides. So I've spent good 18 years in multilateral international institutions, 5-6 years in financial markets, and recently in public policy. It was my second stint in the government. The first stint was I set up the Securities and Exchange Commission some 20 years back. So Abhi, I was in the cabinet for a year, and now I'm advising basically, you know, I'm a kind of a goodwill ambassador to UN. I'm advising Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and China.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. And Haroon Sab is also going to be giving us his keynote remarks shortly. But before that, let me jump to Ali Fareed Khaja, who is the chairman of Custom Securities. Ali also has more than 15 years of experience in equity research and investments. Before that, he used to be partner at Autonomous Research in London, and presently also he's residing there. It's not too early for you, Ali. It's okay, time-wise,
Yes,
it's fine.
it is. No, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Yes, it's 11 o'clock. So it's
Okay, all right. Would you also, and you've also been a top-ranked technology analyst in Europe. So would you like to tell our audience a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. Yes, I've done tech research at UBS, Berenberg. I was a hedge fund manager managing money for Singh, who's the richest man in Asia, investing in emerging markets, starting from Russia, going down to Eastern Europe, Middle East, and all the way down to South Africa. And then I was CFO of a listed fintech company. It was listed on London Stock Exchange. It got acquired by a Canadian company for $1 billion. I was head of their M&A, strategy, and group CFO. And then I became a partner at Autonomous Research, which got acquired by AllianceBernstein, which is one of the largest asset managers in the world. I was head of the European fintech coverage. And then now, as you mentioned, I'm the chairman of KSP Securities, which is an investment bank in Pakistan.
Thank you so much for joining us, Ali. All right. And last but not least, we've got Farial. So Farial, you hold a similar title as me. You've also been a social entrepreneur. You are a social entrepreneur, but now recently you're also working in the investment space, as well as the energy and the policy making arena as well. So could you tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you do now? And, a little bit about how you got here, right? Because I think that will be very interesting for our audience as well.
Yeah, sure. So, Samar, it's actually great to be here, and especially sharing the stage, so-called stage, with both Haroon and Ali, who's an old friend. And interestingly enough, my career started with Ali, and I both started very close to each other in the investment space. And then sort of my career took me to various places, including advising governments in the energy space. Then I worked with multilaterals, and then the most sort of unexpected turn, which got me into entrepreneurship, and now I am leading my startup, which is called Uptrade, and Uptrade, interestingly enough, bridges the gap between the farmers and the urban consumers. And that's the space that I work in. And now I've come a full circle back into investments, where I'm on the board of JSIL.
All right. Okay. And you changed the name recently, right? Earlier it was Goats for Water. Now it's Uptrade. When did that shift happen? And
yes, we basically expanded. So what started with one project, now we've expanded to Goats for Solar. We're doing Goats for Phones. So we thought we should come up with another name called Uptrade, which is sort of trading and upgrading, sort of the combination. So that's the name change.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Farial. All right. So without much ado, Haroon Saab, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. I'll try and set the stage for 8 to 10 minutes. There are 3 thematic areas I would address. So first of all, I will try and capture some global trends which will impact our lives, our businesses, our policies as a whole. Then I will go to the challenges in the region linked to Pakistan, where specifically how Pakistan needs to manage the transition, not only post-COVID, but also what's happening around us. And then thirdly, a few points that where do we go from here, and what can private sector, particularly young entrepreneurs, SMEs, and others can do to play their role, or as I say, raise the game, which is needed in Pakistan. So on the global trends, I think the most stark changes which are happening across the globe, first and the foremost is that we are moving away from globalization gradually. And now the focus is more on the regional markets, where proximity has become an advantage for people. This whole China Belt and Road initiative is based on that. And I see blocks emerging across the globe. So I think if the past 20 years were globalization, we are moving more and more towards regionalism. I see politics globally remain in flux. I see a leadership vacuum, which we saw post-COVID as well. People like me were very hopeful that somebody will take leadership and dialogues will start, conflicts will reduce because of COVID, but that didn't happen. So we increasingly live in a more interconnected planet, but a very lonely planet because everybody is focused internally. So that's a shift which we need to live with it. I also see a lot of populism coming in, not only a short-term nature of thinking in the globe. So these are few things which are not Pakistan or Asia specific, it's everywhere. Second change which I see is that the trust in democracies have gone down in terms of delivery. I also see a weakening role of multilateral organizations like UN, World Bank, WTO, etc. Their ability to actually impact development is questioned. Also, their ability to resolve disputes is very, very widely questioned. So people, so what it means, people will try and find their own solutions in their own neighborhoods rather than going to a global multilateral setting. And Pakistan, since we are heavily dependent on multilateral, so it's an important thing for Pakistan to see. Third thing is that future lies with emerging and young Asia. And not many people are coming to terms with it. In fact, this transition is getting somewhat messy. But for Pakistan, it's critical for Pakistan that how do we catch up with emerging Asia? And some of the projections which I did with Prime Minister Imran Khan. So I actually think that Pakistan can reach in next 20 years or so in the levels of Malaysia or some other countries, but not China's and Indonesia because they have, or India's, they have gone ahead. And fourth change, I think, which is the future of jobs. And that's a critical change which is happening where specializations are going down. General purpose, digital knowledge will actually prevail in future. Unskilled workers will be replaced by artificial intelligence. So that's where Pakistan needs to play a game because our skills model needs to be reviewed. So these were the four major global trends I wanted to start with, which I see will impact our lives in future. Now coming back to Pakistan, right at the outset, I would say that Pakistan needs a very clear economic growth model. We at this point in time are a confusion of multiple things. Do we want to be a transit country, an agro-based country, an industrial country, or services? Services have contributed highest in our GDP. So I think it's the clarity on next 10 years focus and direction is needed. Pakistan, I speak very straight because I have the insider knowledge as well in some work I've done globally. Pakistan is at the revival phase at the moment from COVID. Politicians might say that, economy is going up, but I think next year will be the year of revival. So if we have stabilized the economy, we should look at revival. Our growth might come in 2022 if we put, certain pieces correctly. Second comment I have is that there are a couple of things Pakistan has done well in the past 1 year. Not only dealing with COVID, but overall in economy. First of all, I must appreciate that the government has, excuse me, the government has shown good financial discipline. And because of that, the IMF, program is pretty much online in terms of our imbalances, what we call twin, the current account and the fiscal deficits. Secondly, Prime Minister's focus was very much on the poorest of the poor in the COVID part. So the SAS program, the cash transfers, we have done reasonably well. Thirdly, this whole focus on construction industry will also create jobs for the lower end of the market and also for some of the big players. So these are the positivities. And honestly speaking, I was on all 5 trips with the Prime Minister in the first year. But now when I talk to the people, I'm advising 3-4 governments. Pakistan does enjoy, a good degree of goodwill for these steps. And recently, my friend Amin Aslam just told me that World Economic Forum has recognized him for the climate change initiatives. So there is a goodwill that Pakistan is doing good things. So I will start with this positive note. Linked to COVID, I think Pakistan did very well, as I said, for the poorest of the poor. We also helped the large corporate sector through State Bank of Pakistan interventions. The interest rates went down, lending became easier. What we could not do was the missing middle, which is the largest, employer, which is also mostly unbanked, which is in the informal space. So small and medium entrepreneurs, retailers, gas stations, restaurants, and a host of industries, because they don't go to banks. So we have an institutional gap which could not address. We had, this Benazir income support program to do the Asas fund. We had the networks and everything. We have microfinance for the poor. We have big banks for the, corporate sector and capital markets, but we have nothing left actually for the medium and small entrepreneurs and the young, startups you're talking. So I think there's a gap in institutional space which needs to be lobbied and filled. And the voice of these enterprises in Islamabad is very limited. So I would also, these are the two things which I have noticed in our recovery. And that worries me because that's where most of the jobs are. That's where most of the innovation is. And that's where the future lies. Now, Pakistan's challenge after stabilization, we have been in IMF programs, 13 times in the past 30 years. I think where we are struggling, and all of us know, is that we do stabilize, but we fail to sustain it. And then eventually after 4 or 5 years, we go back to that. So for that, certain structural shifts Pakistan will have to take, which I will name, for instance, one, that we need to once and for all decide about our state-owned enterprises. That's a structural shift that how we run the country. There are some movement in power sector reforms and others, but I'm trying to say rather than picking many, we need to give signal to the world that we are serious about, changing the way we do business. And we are, willing to deal with structural imbalances. Second part is that we need to change our model of governance of public policy, and we need less government and more partnerships. So I used to tell the Prime Minister and cabinet colleagues that jo reform hoti hai, it's not necessarily that you do more things. At times, reform is that you do less things. And that is something our politicians don't understand because they would like to have more projects, that this is what we are doing. So I was saying it will be good if you do lesser thing and let private sector do other things. And that's perhaps one of the reasons why I'm not there anymore. But anyway, so moving ahead, so that is how, some structural messaging. Pakistan needs serious thinking. How can we leverage China-Pakistan economic corridor? At this point in time, it's a good thing that we are part of it. We are the fifth, corridor in BRI. But I was the counterpart to China for 1 year on industrial cooperation under CPEC. I think it's all China's thought process which is driving it. It is critical for us to figure out that this infrastructure and other things, how it's going to benefit us, what we should demand, what industries should shift, what technologies are to be coming here. And that's, unfortunately, there's very little thinking on that, and that worries me. But CPEC could be a great thing for Pakistan to take regional leadership because China is on Pakistan's back. So particularly on our Western side, we can play a strategic role. But for that, we need to develop our own model of regional connectivity rather than just taking, whatever advice coming from China, because China has a different centralized controlled government. They have a different model of development. But CPEC, I see very positive thing, but we need to maximize its impacts by doing our own thought process right. In future, Pakistan needs to reduce dependence on donors and IFIs because A, the money is drying down in the West. B, there is so much capital available within the region through sovereign wealth funds, through private funds, through capital markets. Pakistan needs to take that shift because for the first time I have been, part of the international agencies and, World Bank Group. it's the first time I'm seeing these institutions' credibility very low. Their influence, the political influences, look at FATF and other things, very, very high in these international institutions. And it is in the benefit of Pakistan that we diversify our financing base through private sector instruments and investments rather than asking donors to pump up money. And I'll give you an example. I negotiated the loans from Saudi Arabia and UAE and China when Prime Minister came into power, these short-term deposits. At that time, I also cautioned, like hot money, it can go back anytime. If we had given an investment proposition, that's a longer-term money, which stays and that stabilizes. We need very serious thinking again on the future of skills in Pakistan, the participation of women, the federation and provincial fragmentation. For instance, objectives of a province and federation are actually, they don't converge, because federation wants exports, we want revenues, whereas they want more money, they need more jobs for their people, they need to protect their constituencies. So Pakistan needs to do a lot of work, and SMEs have suffered because after the 18th Amendment, most of that part went to provinces and they are just not ready to deal with it. So major structural intervention would be needed. Last part. Now, what's the way forward? I think Pakistan historically has shown our overall GDP growth average growth has declined. So we are in the range of 3 to 4%. In order to entertain the 1 million labor force coming in the market every year, we need 7%. Now, for that, we need to increase our productivity in each and every sector. So productivity, where our strengths are in agro-based value addition, financial services, information technology, value-added textiles. What we need to look at is we need to emphasize, be more competitive and be regional value chains. We can't do everything. I will re-emphasize. Doing everything from tourism to construction to large-scale manufacturing, no country can do it. The investors are waiting for incentives and signals that what are the 3 priorities and what Pakistan is doing about it. Pakistan's capacity is very low to do many things, but somehow the political populism drives us to do many things and ending up doing nothing. So we need to very seriously think about it. Pakistan's investment to GDP ratio is around 15%, one of the lowest in the region. So we need to do investment climate reforms, and I would highlight 2 things. There's a lot of emphasis which I was doing on ease of doing business, which World Bank does. I'll be very honest here. Ease of doing business alone or giving signal at political level that we are open for business, that does not bring in business. You need to look at contract enforcement. You need to look at how commercial disputes are resolved. You need to have good policies. You need to do property rights. These are the things, and lower cost of energy and skills. That's what that attracts people. But on top of that, a regional peace. When 2 countries with nuclear arms are dagger drawn, any serious investor will think several times before coming to that region. So we need to think about how to develop a responsible neighborhood. We don't necessarily need to be overly friendly with our neighbors because that's not going to happen, but at least develop a pact of responsible dealing so that world takes us more seriously. Financial sector reform is critical. Pakistan's capital market has frankly done very little for lots of things like infrastructure development. Nothing. I was surprised to see that in higher education sector, there is hardly any lending facility available either for student loans or even for universities. So I think the capital market needs to raise the game and raise capital for development in Pakistan. And finally, the digital economy for services and accountability, I would like to highlight. There's a lot of focus on digital economy, but so far it is on the giving end. But Pakistan needs to use digital economy to hold our policymakers accountable as well. It's a lot easier, and private sector should think about it. And I will close that private sector needs to raise its game from a patronage-based state-centric private sector to a young, entrepreneurial, competitive private sector. Because as long as हम लोग ये patronage पे चलते रहेंगे, dole-outs पे चलते रहेंगे, tax incentives पे चलते रहेंगे, we'll never be competitive. We'll remain in the infant industry. So it's time for Pakistan's private sector to stop looking towards the state and just do it. So that's my message. So thank you very much. So I look forward to hearing other colleague panelists.
Thank you very much, Haroon Saab. There are tons of interesting comments that you've made, and I will come back to it. But before I, launch off in the next round of questions for you, I think Ali and then Ferial, if you want to add more to what Haroon Saab said, right? And in a way, he's also given the invitation to the private sector that, hello guys, wake up, take some action. How would you like to respond to that and just add on to what he was saying?
Ferial, you want to go first? I have a few points, and it was a great presentation, very insightful.
Yeah, it was actually quite interesting, and I really like the points that you raised, Haroon, about the private sector moving from being this patronage-based system to more entrepreneur and business leadership skills-based sort of game. Because it's true, like up till now, and this is the change that I've seen, and maybe Ali, and you can also shed light on it, that we're definitely at a pivot point where prior to maybe a couple of years ago, the private sector was defined by large local companies, which were also sort of hand in hand, and there was a big culture of lobbying with the government, which ended up in some of the industries growing, but also limiting the growth within the industries. And the power sector is definitely one of them. The automobile sector is also one of them. And that I'm seeing come to an end. And what I'm also seeing is the startup culture kind of changing that, along with the will on the government side. There is a change in accountability. There's a change in knowledge that that we all have now access to, and that is really sort of changing the way business is being done now. And I think it's also challenging to the old players in the industry to also kind of sort of stop depending and leaning on the traditional, more traditional lobby-based ways of doing business, and becoming more competitive and offering more to gain more market. So that's one thing which I had in mind after hearing Haroon Saab. Ali, I'm sure you have a lot more. I'll step in when I...
Great, no, thank you. Haroon Saab, that was an excellent presentation, and very insightful. I totally agree with all the points. They're very, very important ones. I'll just follow up with your points. Like, you mentioned that in Pakistan, there's an increasing, very high dependence on IMF and World Bank. And in fact, our policies bodies don't know much about, except these bodies. So, at the Ministry of Finance, there's a desk which just deals with ADB and World Bank. And just to put that in, so many people, and of course, our ministers come from those bodies as well. So I feel that in Pakistan, at least at the policy level, they are only geared towards asking money from the donor agencies. And they might not even know that the top 50 asset managers in the world have $63 trillion of asset under management. The top 10 have 29 trillion. The largest, which is BlackRock, manages $6.3 trillion. In comparison, IMF's total balance sheet size is 1 trillion and World Bank's is 50 billion. So in the list of people who have capital, World Bank will not even appear in the probably top 50 list. So, but surprisingly in Pakistan, they don't even know BlackRock or Vanguard or State Street or Fidelity, but they think that World Bank and IMF and ADB are the key sources of capital which they need to tap. And as you rightly said, that their money comes with strings attached, and it has been proven that those strings are political in nature. So it's so not only is their wallet not that big, but also their wallet has strings. And there are other sources which are much greater capital, and we are not even aware of those. So I certainly agree with you. And the second point where you said the private sector in terms of, again, I totally agree with you. For me, the biggest optimism in Pakistan is the growth in tech. And the reason why I was optimistic about it was that it was not regulated. As you rightly pointed out, that wherever the state goes, it just sucks up energy and any kind of space for private sector. And that's what we have seen in Pakistan. So regulated sectors are sectors where you have patronage for obvious reasons. So the good thing for tech was that at least when it started, there was no government involved because the bureaucrats in Pakistan didn't understand it. So they didn't understand Uber, they didn't understand Kareem, WhatsApp, Facebook until it was too late. And when these bodies did grow, they did try to stop it. So, they did try banning Kareem, they did try banning Uber, they did ban
as well.
So I think the big optimism with tech is that you can be under the radar until you become bigger, and then you can deal with the government. So your advice to the government to scale down is really, really important, and I think that's what is needed.
Okay, thank you so much, Ali. I want to come back, Haroon Saab, to a couple of things. Oh, you've gone on mute. Did you want to add something here?
Nani, please go ahead.
Acha, I wanted to, dig a bit deeper. So even when the policies came out to support SMEs and larger sectors, like you rightly pointed, there wasn't much attention which was given to startups or the ones that are smaller in size, right? And that, to my mind, was the biggest problem, because the kind of industry that we've been supporting, the startup industry, and you've got a lot of support coming in from the federal government as well as the provincial governments, the Punjab IT Board, PITB, as well as KPITB, the Ministry of IT and Telecom. They've all been supporting all these incubators. And what the incubators have done is really propelled young people into the field of entrepreneurship. On the other hand, you had higher education sector, where every institution has to set up their own incubators or and incubators. And then suddenly, when you're coming up with this policy, you're kind of forgetting about this whole arena where because we work very closely with them, so many people were running out of jobs. And these guys are really, really important. Not only are they providing jobs for themselves, they're extremely young, extremely passionate, extremely dynamic, extremely talented, filled with energy. And here I was listening, not just me, I'm sure a lot of my counterparts as well were receiving phone calls. What can you do? And then, of course, when we are the private sector, not all of us have access to money. We're already putting in, our sweat and blood as private incubators or accelerators driving it. So when you say that, look, there is that gap, how do we bridge that particular gap? So that's one question. And second question, which you mentioned, right? So you used to be part of SECP as well. And we keep seeing positive steps, right? So I would say by and large, there have been positive steps by SBP, by SECP, etc. Yet on the investment side, when it comes to drawing in private money, and that's another mission which Epiphany has taken on. It's extremely difficult because after every little while, investors want to know how they can take their money out, right? And it's I have to report, okay, now this money is coming in, where is it coming in, what is it for? Okay, we're happy to do that, but then taking money out is such a big issue as well. So on both these points, I'd like to kind of hear your thoughts and what private sector organizations, smaller ones like myself, what can we do?
Thank you. Important points. देखिए, first of all, आपका सवाल है कि why you were not on the radar, the smaller, innovative startups and tech companies. If you look at the composition of the people who are calling the shots, frankly, you have no voice there. So it's an old school which continues to dominate the policy space. So uske liye, any newcomer, you have to create your own space and more space, and also give them solutions. So at this point, this is something I think we need to reach out to the key people, younger politicians and others, involve with them, engage them, tell them that what value you are creating, why it is politically important for the government to support you. Government, as I said, are becoming more and more populist. लेकिन जब आप गरीब का काम करते हैं, publicity मिलती है, वोट कराते हैं. Similarly, जो अमीर है वो आपकी पार्टियां फंड करता है. Let's be very candid. So you need to be relevant and figure out a strategy and partnership so that your voice is there. But for more important thing is that आप लोगों के लिए the capital requirements are not that huge. But the institutions A, don't know how to deal with you.
Mm-hmm.
B, it's a different kind of environment, and banks are sitting cozy. It's a commercial bank-led market. So why would they bother? वो golf खेल रहे हैं, पैसे दे रहे हैं सरकार को, तो आपके पास क्यों आएंगे? So you need to basically, आप जैसे बात कर रही हैं, you need to create, institutions, lobby for it, which do intermediations for your sector. जब इदारा होता है वहां पर, so then government को वो नजर आ रहा होता है, they could use it. जैसे एक जमाने में SME बैंक था, SMEs को करता था, then it, so that's my answer. In terms of investment, देखिए investment के 3 components हैं जो बड़े critical हैं. Regulation is just one of them. But first is that people want to see consistent policies. All large-scale investment transactions in Pakistan have gone bad, mostly because of inconsistency of policy. आज आप एक टैरिफ देते हैं, कल को वो बदल देते हैं. एक टैक्स इंसेंटिव है, कल को वो चेंज हो जाता है. डिस्प्यूट हो जाता है, आप कोर्ट में जाते हैं, then you are dead anyways. So एक तो उस एरिया को है. Exit के अंदर half of my time in board of investment was fighting with state bank के dividend to pay करने दो भाई, because they didn't want to let even a single dollar go out. So इसके लिए जो हमारे इदारे हैं अभी तक, because the level of foreign investment is so low, they haven't really set up systems. ये चीजें तो automatic होनी चाहिए. देखिए ना, these things should be basically digital based. There should be no regulator involved in it. So these are the things which, investors, I can give you, one of the, without naming a head of state, quietly told me when, we agreed on a large package, कि देखो ये तुम्हारी bureaucracy नहीं कर पाएगी. Can you kind of come up with a corporate-like setup where you insulate us from bureaucracy and have a new set of rules? ये rules economic zones में हो सकते. Because you can actually insulate that area and come up with these services. Changing the whole Pakistan system, which is basically been captured by vested interests, उसको भी 50 साल लगेंगे. मैंने महातीर मोहम्मद से 1-to-1 ये सवाल पूछा. मैं 3 दफा उन्हें मिला, तो उन्होंने मुझे, वो he's a very thoughtful gentleman. So उन्होंने कहा कि बात ये है कि मेरा ख्याल है अभी आप तैयार नहीं हैं. मेगा चेंज. So मेगा चेंज के लिए बहुत से और चाहिए होते हैं इंस्ट्रूमेंट जो भी पाकिस्तान में नहीं है. बट ये जो my hope is that technology can bolt out many of the old schools, and then people will be more visible. एक तो शहबाज शरीफ साहब ने मुझे कहा था, मैंने कहा जी आप पंजाब में इतने साल रहे हैं चीफ मिनिस्टर, when he was chief minister, तो how do you see change? इससे पहले lots of businessmen, I knew everybody who was a businessman. He said a lot of business is happening and I am very worried कि ये कौन लोग हैं. So I assured him कि अगर वो आपके पास नहीं आ रहे हैं तो बहुत अच्छी बात है. Let them do their business.
Absolutely, yes.
So,
absolutely.
But that is also there are thinking about it कि ये कौन है, क्या करते हैं, but lot is happening which government doesn't know. It's a good thing as a matter of fact. So over to other colleagues.
जी, ये अली आप भी कुछ mention कर रहे थे, right? So you were also talking about it and how on the technology side, perhaps not having people who understand it very, very well is actually positive, especially when you're trying to kickstart an industry, right? So my question to you was more related to technology and really saying, how can Pakistan leverage it? So all of us understand the potential, right? We know कि Alibaba की एक दिन की जो sales हैं, they were, $38 billion. हमारे उसी साल के 2019 के जो पूरा का पूरा exports, revenue था for goods, that was less than that, right? 23.5 billion or so. So obviously we understand that this is the way to go, and we have seen a lot of positive momentum in this area as well, especially, and I would say, this is like the positive side of COVID, as we were talking about it earlier as well, that, it's pushed people into that technology, they've got to overcome that technology curve, right? So those are all positives, right? But what do you think are some concrete mechanisms, concrete steps that the government, the private sector, or different institutions need to take to make sure that Pakistan is indeed propelled into that faster and in a sustainable fashion, both?
Great question. पहले तो जो जैसा आपने पहले पॉइंट रेज किया कि स्टेट बैंक का FE मैनुअल, फॉरेन एक्सचेंज मैनुअल बड़ा रिस्ट्रिक्टिव है और उसकी वजह से फॉरेन इन्वेस्टमेंट इज अ नॉन स्टार्टर इन पाकिस्तान. सो द ओनली वे टू गेट दैट foreign investors invest in an offshore company, and then that offshore company invests locally. So, I think that's a non-starter. And the fact that everybody knows that, and still State Bank has not done anything to solve that, shows you the scale of the problem, and then the problem being them rather than, i.e. the bureaucracy. So I totally agree with what Haroon Saab said, that the solution, we cannot change the bureaucracy, it's too difficult. So SEZs, special zones where separate rules can be set up, is the way forward. But that was the hope and vision for CPEC. But I don't think we have seen many SEZs. And from what I heard, there was a desire of SECP to put companies' ordinance on the companies which are set up in SEZs, which was the whole reason that was the whole purpose of SEZ, to avoid the company's ordinance. So I think, that is the way forward. There's no other option. Now, coming to, again, the point which has already been raised, that if I'm a businessman, if I'm running a startup, I don't want to be involved in talking to Shahbaz Sharif and talking to the government and talking to SECP. I don't want to lobby because I don't have time. I'm focusing on my business. I don't have money. So if I am spending that much time and money on talking with all of these guys, then something is wrong. And then those are the hurdles which we talk about. And the government has to make sure that they're invisible rather than being the gatekeepers. And I think Haroon Saab has mentioned this before I have. Now, you mentioned there are two approaches on tech. So is a US model. In the US, e-commerce, the first transaction of e-commerce was done in 92. So even till early this year, before COVID, e-commerce accounted for 10% of overall retail. So it wasn't really explosive as the way we think of explosive. It has taken, Amazon was founded in 1994. China was the only example where it did grow explosively. And the reason why it happened was that the Chinese government got involved and set up the enabling factors. Now, India is copying that in terms of putting the rails down and forcing the shift to happen. Now, unfortunately, I think that's too much to expect from Pakistan. So I suppose the only thing Pakistan can do is that curb its desire of control. And I think it's a big ask. As Haroon Saab said, there's an internal desire of not just the politicians, but all of the bureaucrats, of everybody, to be off control of things. And I think that's the first premise they have to give up.
Okay. Can I quickly ask you another follow-up question about the private sector, right? So what is the role that the private sector can play? And we did talk about it briefly, Haroon Saab, jo aapne kaha hai, which is really important, right? Ki ab private sector, in a way, the private sector actually has a huge potential to start investing in experiments like this. Either drive their own experiments, technology related, because they have the muscle, right? They've got the financial muscle behind them, and either existing koi intervention ho rahi hai, startup kar raha hai, koi bhi kar raha hai, usko support kar sakte hain, apne idea mein they can just take it forward. So how would you respond to that? And does KASB have, KSP, does it have any such kind of plans, or how do you see this?
So generally, private sector, almost by definition, is rational. It's driven by the motive of profits. And you're totally right that there should be more growth focus, and I think the growth focus will automatically come if they see opportunities. So that's, I think, and inherently the incentive structure is there for them. So I don't think that they can be told to do this or that, and that's fairly defined. Now, in terms of KSB, for example, on the fintech side, we have this app called K-Trade. Our whole mission was to democratize investments. We wanted 1 million people to invest in the capital markets, so connect savers with good idea companies. So with our app K-Trade, for example, 100,000 people use it in Pakistan. With that, they can invest in companies listed in Pakistan and put money in that. And now with Roshan Digital accounts, overseas, we are one of the 5 brokers which are integrated for that. So overseas Pakistanis can now use that app to invest in the companies listed here. So that's the role which we are playing in terms of trying to expand the capital markets, which Haroon Saab mentioned about it earlier. Pakistani capital markets are misunderstood. They're very small, and I think one of the reasons for their lack of scale is also, there was a period of 2008 till 2018 when there was over-regulation which was put on the sector. And that just killed the market. I think a lot of that is reversing now. SECP has done very, very good reforms, and PSX has seen a good change with the new management coming in. So I'm very hopeful that things are moving in the right direction. I hope it continues like that.
Okay, thank you, Ali. Okay, we'll pause here because I do want Fariel also to answer a few questions, right? So, Fariel, you're bridging, right? You're bridging the whole world of startups, social entrepreneurs, energy investments, all of that, right? So, how do you see? What do you, how do you think we can utilize the potential of small startups, SMEs, social enterprises to rebuild the future of Pakistan, right? So that's one question. And B, on the energy side, of course, we understand that renewable investments tend to be a lot bigger. And like we've established, obviously, Pakistan's investment scenario is perhaps not, doesn't perhaps, generate a lot of confidence, right? So how do you see both those elements? Because in the recent past, right, in the past 2-3 years since I've been pursuing entrepreneurship, there's also a green entrepreneurship initiative that we launched. We've seen a lot more interest, right, in people coming up with different sorts of solutions as well. But of course, when it comes to larger scale projects, it's not a small investor who can potentially do it, right? The government needs to be involved. It is at the government level. So what do you see on both these fronts?
So sorry, yeah, in terms of, let me start with your first part, which is startups. And your question was that what is the role of startups and also small and medium enterprises in the future growth of the country? So let me start with that. So what I'm seeing is that SMEs, we had come to a point where the traditional large MNCs and the traditional large local private companies had taken the economy to a certain point, right? And then we saw the growth kind of come to like not a halt, but kind of like sort of like going along. And then over the last few years, we saw the gaps in the economy. We saw the gaps also in what the consumers wanted and what was available. And that's where we saw the startups and the SMEs come in, right? And now I'm talking about consumers at all levels, not just the urban, but also the rural, right? And these are the gaps in our economy, which are still falling in the informal, unregistered, undocumented sector. So agriculture, as Haroon Saab said, is one of the big areas that we can see growth in. And from what I have seen personally in the livestock sector, this was estimated to be about a $7.8 billion industry in Pakistan. And it is all cash-based, right? It starts with your rural smallholder farmers who are most of the time beneficiaries, and it ends in the export market. And this is primarily, like a big chunk of it is cash transactions and undocumented sort of transactions. So SMEs like Uptrade, which are now going into the tech side also, to basically bring this sector from your invisible, undocumented side to the more documented side, using technology like digital payments, right? So what I'm seeing now is that SMEs and startups are kind of going into the spaces which were kind of invisible, that had fallen between the cracks of large MNCs and large local companies, the textile and the automobile and blah blah blah. But nobody was working in these invisible areas. That's where the SMEs have come in. That's where the startups with their tech have come in to bridge those gaps. And that's the role that I see for SMEs and startups, to get into those niches and really push the economy from those areas. In terms of renewables and the energy sector investments, that will still remain. I mean, I see the startups now getting into a lot of the off-grid space, and that's been there for the last 10 years. Pakistan is still fairly behind on the off-grid side. It is still, in the last 5 years, your grid connected solar, your rooftop solar has come in, right? Your IPPs are still fairly large, and those won't be considered startups or SMEs as such. Those still require huge amounts of funding. And interestingly enough, it goes back to the first point which Haroon Saab had touched on, that we need to stop looking at the DFIs for financing these, right? There's a whole capital world out there that needs to step in. And in terms of our banking is very sort of what's called lazy banking. It's based on collateral. It's based on relationships, right? कि हमने पहले इनके साथ काम किया हुआ है, we know. So it's very easy for them to get financing again. Or okay, अगर आपको loan चाहिए तो आप अपनी ज़मीन दे दें, collateral क्या है, blah blah blah, right? Now in this new, can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes.
In this new sort of environment where we have startups coming in with no collateral, right? And especially women-led startups. And the State Bank, by the way, is doing some really incredible things on this, where they've made financing available to women entrepreneurs. I think up to 50 million now. They increased it from, which was 1.5 million, which is nothing really, and they've increased the size up to 5 and 50 million. But like, how can startups come in and say, okay, give us a loan, we don't have anything to give you in collateral, and we're a startup because we're not coming from the traditional industries, right? So the banking sector really needs to be sort of shaken up its stupor, right? And forced to go into more sort of creative ways of lending, which are happening. Well, these have now become the norm elsewhere. It'll just be creative here to sort of go into revenue-based lending or other methods. So that's the role that I see startups sort of shaking the system out. So even the banking side, what I see startups doing is coming out from the invisible spaces, making those more visible, and also shaking the traditional industries to sort of up their game now.
Okay, so there's another question, right? Okay, so this is actually a startup who comes and attends at different trainings, etc. He's incubated at the NIC in Peshawar. So he's saying regarding sustainable energy, how much interest is there to invest in the electric vehicle industry? So he's actually in the process of designing electric vehicle bikes, and we know that the policy has come out from the government side. So whoever wants to answer this question, right? So what can he actually do? He's got the prototype ready as well, by the way. So.
Oh, that's wonderful. So, so I'm part of this this fellowship, which is based out of LA, and one of my fellows is based out of India, and he's also doing electrical vehicles, and they've come up with electrical rickshaws. So it's wonderful to know that someone in Pakistan has already done this, and I think there's such a huge scope for it. I'm so glad whoever this person is that who is doing this, because I think
he's riding it, by the way. He's riding his bike. Yes. I'm just saying he's riding his bike already. Can you hear? Sorry. Yeah, he's riding his bike, and he's he's taking pre-orders, by the way. So if anybody is interested, it just costs 1.5 lakh rupees.
I mean, you
drive
could,
this really Uber cool bike.
Yeah, I think there should be a lot of interest. Ali and Haroon can also. I'm very, very excited about this, and I'd love to hear more about this.
Okay, good. I'll connect you, Fariel, with Moyuddin. Over to you guys. Yes, this question has come in. So what do you guys think?
I have a couple of points here, if it's all right. एक तो question जो I think very relevant points have been raised by both the panelists, and Fariel जैसे कह रही हैं, देखिए जो risk capital है, that's not available. It's a lending based financial market. Risk capital उन मुल्कों में grow करता है जहाँ पे rule of law मजबूत होता है. यहाँ पर अगर आप देखिए, even जो state bank की window है, that's lending. So the point which has been raised is more toward directed lending. But what people like me now, it's been a year in private space, I'm talking to people that even if you put in, $10, $20 million, Once in front of the Prime Minister, I asked all the 20-25 big businessmen कि आप सारे मुझे $5 lakh दीजिए, and I will basically form a fund for risk capital. And these people, perhaps they spent $500,000 on one vacation. I couldn't even raise that. So that's a group which is patronage based, which is only, they are not interested in competition or innovation. So we need to figure out the pockets of risk capital and demonstrate that that can work. So that's one, response. Otherwise, your banks हैं, वो risk business में नहीं होते, वो cash flow lending भी नहीं करते. They are collateral based lending vehicles in South Asia. Renewable energy के ऊपर देखिए बहुत innovation होगी, लेकिन इसमें दो चीजें हैं. It took me a year. I had solid investors who wanted to put in, both wind and solar in Pakistan, and up to $4 billion. Prime Minister gave me blessings, but हमारी ministry इतनी ज़्यादा entrenched है IPPs के साथ that I went from one window to the other. मैं उसकी policy नहीं बनवा पाया. I think that lobby needs to be done. फिर China में I told the Prime Minister कि देखिए उन्होंने एक पूरे शहर को, the way they did was कि वहाँ सारे जो two wheeler थे उनको उन्होंने कहा कि जी अब से ये इलेक्ट्रिक हुआ करेंगे, बैटरी बेस्ड. अभी मैंने ये बात की थी and excitement was created. 4 दिन के बाद, all the Japanese, the Hondas and Suzukis reached here in Ministry of Commerce and make sure that nothing moves in that direction. Then Honda guys started calling me कि ये गांव में तो हो ही नहीं सकता, distances जहाँ कम हो वहाँ होता है. So we have all kind of, it is basically in order for people to believe that this can work, government needs to shake up the system by taking one step. कि ये आज से लाहौर में गुलबर्ग और कैंट के अंदर कोई गैस वाला बाइक नहीं आएगा, ये ऑयल वाला. Then things start changing. बाकी छोटे लेवल पे होता रहेगा gradual, but I'm hoping that because Prime Minister has that capacity, his bureaucracy kills it. And unfortunately, at the second year, and again the ministers, most of my friends, they still come from a very old school, वो इसमें आते नहीं है. So we need risk capital, जो कि ना सिर्फ पैसे दे बल्कि managerial advice भी दे. Second ये है कि हमें चाहिए एक दो बड़ी interventions करके दिखाएं, because that's where the future lies. लेकिन ये जो हमारा issue है of vested interest capturing the policy space, इसको तोड़ने का, ये जो है ना, इसको stuck करने का एक ही तरीका है कि आप इसको जो अब आपकी social media की space है, इसको policy debate से ज़्यादा link करें, so that people understand the concept. The traditional ways, it will be very difficult, but again I'm saying you need to lobby to have a voice in the system. There is politicians want to hear you, but there is a whole machine जिसने जैसे अगर आपने किताब पढ़ी हो Why Nations Fail, वो उसके अंदर बात ही आर्गुमेंट ही ये है कि जब इदारे जो हैं वो सिर्फ एक तबके के लिए बनाए जाते हैं, they don't cater the others, the nations don't prosper.
Yep. Ali, did you want to add something? Otherwise, we also have another question from a young entrepreneur based out of Hyderabad, Danish. He's asking a question. Should I take this question?
Please do.
Okay, so he says, how can young entrepreneurs be recognized as all of the venture capital is supporting entrepreneurs who've been there for years? ठीक है, उनका point ये कि ज़्यादा mature जो startups होते हैं 7 years, 5 years, and then people end up investing in them. इनका जो startup है, I know this guy also. इनका startup is actually connecting जो artisanal सारे जो आपकी artisans हैं based in Hyderabad and interior Sindh and the rest of the world. The rest of Pakistan, he connects them and he wants to try and sell to richer audiences within Pakistan as well as abroad. Yes, Ariel, of course you may answer.
This was something that I also wondered about when I was starting out, that, oh my God, how do we get this kind of attention? And I realized that it is a function of, it's just how the VC industry works, and Ali will be able to also answer that from his perspective. I am answering it from what I have learned from the startup side, right? That they do their due diligence and they wait for the company to see where is it going, what is happening in that industry, what sort of traction are they showing. And I think VCs only step in after you've hit a certain revenue number, right? And there's stages. So So for every startup, every company or an SME that you are starting, you go through various stages of investment.
Your voice is breaking up a lot.
Do you hear me now? Is this better?
Yes, it is better. Ji.
So you see those, you start, there's a whole ladder that you have to go through before you hit the VC. So we started with what is called friends and family round. Then there's seed, pre-seed. So you slowly work with smaller amounts until you hit a point where the VC steps in. And VC generally steps in with growth capital, where you're ready to really take your model or whatever work you're doing and grow it. And you're very close to like generating your profits. So I would say it's not about a function of time. Just take the next step. Just keep growing to the next step, and the VCs will come when you start showing the numbers.
Okay, very good. All right. So we had a list of questions which somebody emailed me. He couldn't come in himself. So he said, when will COVID end, or what are the possibilities? Right. So that's one question that he's got. That's like a predictive. I mean, I think maybe he thinks we're magicians, that we can answer that one anyway. Number two is, which sectors are interesting once this is about to end? Right. So like right at the beginning, we saw the medical wale jo sare startups they were doing obviously very, very well. A lot of other startups started producing masks and stuff just to stay relevant. And quickly capitalize on that opportunity. So now the second bit that he's asking is, which sectors are interesting once this is about to end? And then the third bit that he's asked is, once somebody has identified an opportunity, then how should one go about it while also staying safe, right? And then the fourth one is, okay, well, the fourth one we answered already. It was more about what can entrepreneurs do and what can the private sector do.
So should I take a crack at that and also comment on the earlier one? I think Ferial has given a great practical steps in terms of how to raise capital. At the policy level, I think it goes back to the point which Haroon Saab made, which is this is all about risk capital. Now in Pakistan, हमारा सारा culture debt का है, government भी debt लेती है, लोगों से भी वो private in पाकिस्तानियों से भी debt लेती है, national saving schemes में, overseas पाकिस्तान को भी debt लेती है, वहाँ से नया पाकिस्तान certificate launch करके, IMF उससे भी debt लेना है, तो उनका culture उनको समझ ही debt की है, तो वो वही चलता रहता है, banks भी वही करते हैं. Now equity culture और risk capital culture develop करना बड़ा important है, क्योंकि उसके बगैर ये सारी चीजें हो नहीं सकती. यूके की मैं आपको एग्जांपल दे देता हूं कि यूके में रिस्क कैपिटल को डेवलप करने के लिए गवर्नमेंट ने इंटरवेंशन ली है, जिसका नाम है, एक स्कीम है जिसका नाम है SEIS और EIS, एंटरप्रेन्योर इंसेंटिव स्कीम. उसमें अगर मैं किसी स्टार्टअप में पैसे डालता हूं तो गवर्नमेंट मुझे 50% to 70% टैक्स रिबेट देती है. तो फॉर every 1,000 pounds which I invest, I actually get 500 to 700 pounds back. So my risk capital is much smaller, but my return is much higher. So that's why people invest. Now, so it goes back to his, again, Haroon Saab points, and, I wish him all the power, because he has the air of the Prime Minister and of people important. I really hope that, the points which he has raised are listened and implemented, that, he mentioned interventions. So, that's the bravest thing which the Prime Minister can do. And he should not be scared of mistakes. When I deal with policy guys, I feel they're always scared. कि हलाएंगे तो ये आएगा, वो एफई मैनुअल चेंज कर देंगे तो ये हो जाएगा, कुछ हुआ है, मतलब they don't have anything and they're scared of, I don't know what. So my advice to any startup in Pakistan, to come into your question in terms of which sector, focus on sectors where you're not relying on government, because that is something which might never come, or it will take such a long time that, you'll go bust. So if you expect that your EV will get government support, that might happen by the time you grow up. Now, Ferial is a great example. She started a startup all in the private sector, which has massive social impact, and she scaled it up, and she was not waiting for a DFI or a government to change rules for her. She just picked an area where she could do things which matter, and which had a social impact, and which had a commercial angle as well. But more importantly, it changed life. So people were willing to support that. So I think my advice for anybody would be that if you are picking up a sector, pick a sector in which you can make money. Don't pick a sector just because you've read about it, that this is what happened in China and this is what happened in Germany. The dynamics of those countries and the support those countries get is very, very different. So don't copy ideas from abroad. Just do what's local, which makes sense for your local dynamics. In terms of COVID, I think it's here to stay. Vaccines might be ready by end of October, but that's just a vaccine. So, it will be like influenza, a flu, which exists, and we just vaccinate ourselves.
We just have to live with this, yes. So just to add on to that point, right, I think that's absolutely correct. Dekhiye, harkat mein barkat hai, right? So you have to take action and you have to try and mobilize all of your existing resources which are within your network, right? So abhi ek micro entrepreneurship ka program ka course hai PSDF ke liye, to abhi exactly मैं यही उस video training के अंदर कह के आई हूँ कि आपको पता नहीं होता कि आपके पास कितने सारे असासे मौजूद होते हैं, right? Which essentially means you don't even think about all the resources which you have, your network. When I started off with this training acceleration program, I dipped into that same network, right? All these people would come in and contribute time to mentor other startups without charging me anything. Now imagine if I was trying to pay them, then obviously I would have gone bust in the first 6 months or something, right? So I think that's really valid. And the other piece, for a very long time, and I think, we've seen people do that as well, we always find ways or people to blame. Whether it's the government, किसी दिन हम उनको कहेंगे, किसी दिन teachers को कहेंगे, अच्छे marks नहीं आए, अच्छा teachers की problem थी, पढ़ाई नहीं हुई, ये नहीं हुआ, वो नहीं हुआ, strike हो गई, वगैरह. I think, that's it. We're done, right? We're young, we're energetic, especially the young entrepreneurs right now. We're the hope. This is it. This is the last generation that can make an impact, whether it's on climate change, whether it is to pull out Pakistan from the mess that it is in, for various reasons, right? Kyun hua, kaise hua, sure, you need to understand it, but aage kya karna hai, that is what you have to look towards, right? And look outside. So the other piece is we need to stop looking only inward. We need to look outward and see where the world is going and realize how far behind we are. And we have this enormous talent and resources at our, it's there, it exists, right? So what can we do? How can we start being honest to our jobs, to whatever we're trying to do, right? Whether it's a business, do it properly, right? Otherwise, stop pretending to be a entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs need chahiye, right? We don't need, if that's not something that you can do, doesn't matter. It's okay. Go and do a job. That's okay. We need people who are very talented on the professional side as well. So everybody has a role to play, right? This is another trend. Jo Haroon sahab bhi keh rahe the about the higher education sector, right? Right now, there's this enormous push towards making everybody turn into entrepreneurs. What are you doing after the incubation, right? How much, and even during incubation, right? They've never worked before, they don't have experience. What sort of guidance is coming back to them, right? And we have the older people who've been there, done that, willing to support. But that's also, you need to find them. You need to find the ones who actually want to be mentors, right? So anyway, okay, Haroon sahab, you wanted to say something, and then we wanted to grab a quick group photo and bring this to a close.
I would just, I think, very interesting discussion. मैं आपको थोड़ी सी अब क्या कहते हैं, as a non-economist, street smart advice I would like to put on table. I think the way I have seen the government in Pakistan in the policy space, मेरी आपको राय ये है कि some people should start putting your thoughts on a piece of paper. जैसे UK में होता है kind of a 3 to 5 pager, 3-pager most likely a white paper. कि देखिए दुनिया में startups के लिए 4 steps हैं, why Prime Minister is not taking it or something, Then, somebody like me in an opportunity can slip it into the power corridors. अगर आप किसी bureaucrat को देंगे तो उसके through ये नहीं जाएगा. Without naming, I am amazed I shouldn't say that outside the cabinet, since I have access in the informal space, I'm able to do more things which I could do when I was the minister. So all I'm trying to say is, as long as you're not in the business of taking credit, let somebody else champion it, but give them something which they can use to take credit. Okay? And these guys are desperately looking for new ideas because, there's a competition. हमने क्या किया? Prime Minister himself is the biggest risk taker all of his life. It is the people, around him, वो ये सोचते हैं जो bureaucrats के ये हो गया तो ये हो जाएगा, ये हो गया तो ये हो जाएगा. It is just that you need a vehicle to cross that wall and put it there. एक दफा वहाँ चला जाए. So I have raised about ₹1 billion recently to 5 banks for digital education. So if there is any interest in Pakistan, just to do some pilots, but we could do, smaller initiatives of risk capital do these things if there are some good ideas. So all I'm trying to say is that keep pushing, but start putting a cooked product, jisko wo happily, they can just eat it, rather than getting into a dialogue which does not translate into action. This is a street smart advice, not a public policy advice.
No, very, very useful advice. Okay, Fariel, quickly give us a smile. Everyone just quickly smile for the camera. Let me switch on. Okay, happy. Okay, awesome.
So are we all done?
Yep, we are all done.
Thank you so much. I have to run. Haroon Saab, Ali, it was great chatting. And Samar, thank you so much. It was really fun.
No, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, Fariel and Ali and Haroon Saab. I know this was short, but thanks so much. We'll have you come back again. And Haroon Saab, I've noted about your impact investment fund. मैं आपको इस coming week में hound करने वाली हूँ, ठीक है?
You send me an email and then we can talk.
We'll do that. Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks so much.
All the best. Look after yourselves.
All right. Good afternoon.